Well, good afternoon, everyone. How are we doing today? This is a Concerned Forum, and I am your host, Robert Guns, and the truth does matter. We've got a few things going on right now, to put it mildly. We have a few things going on in this country. And one of the bothersome things about America of today is that, I don't know, people seem to get carried away by BS. I don't like when our elected officials seem to take it for granted that their voters are stupid. I don't think that's right. I think it was Ben Franklin originally, or one of those founders, that made the observation that the elected officials are supposed to be the servants of the people and not their masters. And I don't know, you tell me, but it seems that it seems to me that a lot of Americans are really being played for chumps. And not only is that disagreeable, it's pretty damn dangerous. Because when you're dealing with people who are supposed to be working for you, but they treat you like a damn jerk every time, well, you got a problem. You know, we have a problem. And one of the biggest pitfalls in America as we're going into this 21st century is the fact that we don't like to deal with the fact that we have problems. That's why some people don't like any talk of critical race theory. All critical race theory is, to put it plain for the average Joe or Jane, all it is just a way or a formula to basically explain what the hell's been happening in this country for the last 400 years. Now, what really bugs me is the fact that people, it's not that they stand up. I want somebody to tell me that critical race theory is a lie. I want someone to tell me that. And then, of course, they can explain to me what about the whole concept of CRT is untrue. You know, it just amazes me that we have in this country a group of people that feel that as long as you don't talk about something, if you don't talk about a problem, then the problem doesn't exist. Okay, well, let's do that for our immigration situation, right? I don't want to see it. I don't want to hear about it. So therefore, there's no problem. And if that sounds silly, well, hey, I'm applying the same logic to the immigration issue that these clowns want to play with the critical race theory, that it didn't happen. Now, I don't know why the hell you're going to try and say, well, I don't want my kids to learn anything about the critical race theory. all they're going to have, all they got to do is go to the Library of Congress or the internet or any half-decent history book, even a conservative history book written by a conservative historian is going to have slavery in there. But you make, they want you to make this big deal about something that's already happened. And obviously there must be some political reason behind it. It's just like the word woke. I noticed on Bill Maher, they talk about, the left, we shouldn't use terms like woke. Well, being woke is just like being cool, okay? It's just putting a little bit of a slang on a word that we've already used. Now, damn it, I spent a good amount of time in my life down south. And I've heard black folks and white folks and Hispanic folks say the same damn word, woke. Come on, boy, ain't you woke yet? Now, when you say woke, people on the right, they get their knickers in a twist. Oh, he's one of those woke characters. Okay, well, what the hell is woke? What are we saying? Woke is just a slang term for being awake or wake up. Or have you not awakened? That's all the hell woke means. But Republicans, not all Republicans, but far too many, they'll use the term woke and say, oh, it's like some kind of gang sign, right? Or it's some kind of sneaky socialist commie code words, Look, we have to stop this nonsense. We all have to grow up. People of color, all people in this country, we have to stop running away from our pain. Let me break that down a little bit. One of the greatest in recorded, that's incoming. One of the greatest bits of political legerdemain, shenanigan, has been, and I give my enemy credit. That's one thing the military definitely taught us. You respect your enemy. You pay attention to what they do and how they do it. Number one, that's a very excellent way to prevent yourself from coming home in a box, okay? That's number one. Number two, when you pay attention to what your enemy is doing, you have an idea of how to cope with that enemy. Now, what's all that mean? Well, the Republican Party, the modern Republican Party, has done something that I think is very rarely has been successful in history, okay? I mean, it is beyond Machiavellian as far as I'm concerned. What the Republican Party has been able to do, it has been able to take white working class people and consistently get them to vote against their own best interest. And that is something that has very, very rarely have you seen that happen in political history. in the West, especially in the Western world. A political party or an ideological belief has been able to get a whole ethnic group, and I say ethnic group or cultural group because any scientist will tell you, they go out there, Columbia University or Harvard or wherever, okay, and they will tell you there's no such thing as race. There's only one race on this planet that pertains to you and I. That's called the human race. So all this business about white, black, red, blah, 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 you know, we have some small superficial differences, okay? But we're all the same, okay? Basic tests. A Chinese person can have a child by a white person, can have a child by a black person, can have a child by a Native American person, can have a child by a Hispanic person, can have a child by a black person, and on and on and on. Okay? That's the main, that's the main qualification right there. We're all human. We're all part of the human family. Now, whether or not you want to accept that, I mean, that's fine. If you go to one of these, I call them batshit crazy evangelical churches in Alabama somewhere that believes that the Almighty just decided to make a blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy and stick him in this place called Eden and then put him to sleep and grabbed a piece of his bone and made a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white lady, well, that's totally incorrect, all right? Science tells us that's bullshit, okay? I mean, I'm sorry to put it that way, folks. Doesn't take the creators, doesn't take anything from our creator, whoever he or she might be, all right? But the idea of, God just planning some blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy, and that's it. Well, no, it didn't go down that way. Any professor of anthropology would tell you you're a fruitcake, all right? I mean, those are just the historical, archaeological facts, right? However, as I said, that is not taking away anything from whatever you feel is the creator. Me, myself, personally, I hate to get into it, but just, for the sake of transparency, I'm not an atheist. I'm more of a Christian agnostic, put it that way, okay? I believe in the supreme being. I believe in the creator. I believe one of the most profound things written in human history is the Sermon on the Mount. And I would suggest that my evangelical friends, especially in so-called red state America, I wish that they would sit down and read it sometimes. Sermon on the Mount, you might have heard about it. Loving your enemy, taking care of the poor, feeding the hungry. That's what he said. But apparently, evangelical Christian America doesn't roll that way. That's a sign of being a commie or something of that nature. But hey, this is America, each to his own. But that's the creator that I roll with, okay? And see, what's happened is that certain people, certain groups of people, they have decided that they were going to, what's that word we like to use now a lot, weaponize. Well, that's what a large segment of Christianity has got, they've gotten into this weaponization thing, right? It's no longer about love thy neighbor. It's no longer about trying to find peace within one's soul. The cross is a sword now, and it's used to basically cut down people who don't look the way we look, who don't pray the way we pray, who practice their values different from ours. And I think that that's the shame of Christianity in the West, Christianity in America. And Christianity has suffered because of it, quite frankly. If you read the statistics, fewer and fewer people attend church services. And one of the main reasons is because people see the BS of mainstream and especially evangelical Christianity. They see the lie. When they see people with signs, Jesus for Trump, and they hear people in some of these so-called red states who talk about, oh, well, I'll take the word of Donald Trump before I take the word of Jesus Christ. That's scary, okay? That is scary. But unfortunately, I think my allergies are starting to act up again. Oh, goodness. But that's what they have done to Christianity in this country. And I'm sorry to see that my old church, Catholicism, former altar boy here, St. Thomas the Apostle, right in the middle of Harlem, but Roman Catholic Church in this country, unfortunately, they have gotten a little bit too close for comfort with the right-wing, bigoted, yes, I said the word bigoted, bigoted evangelical crew. And it's funny in a way because, funny and sad, because these same evangelicals are the ones that, and not really all that long ago, wanted to burn Catholics and keep them out of public office. And I think that's sad. I think that the Pope that we have, Pope Francis, I think he's a very interesting fellow. I think he's probably the most enlightened Pope that we've had since Pope John the 23rd. And that is what upsets the conservatives in the Catholic Church here in America. And that's so wrong and that's so sad. I went to public school for a couple of years, but most of my education was in Catholic school. And I was very fortunate in that regard because at the time I was in Catholic school here in New York, you had some very enlightened people in the church, frankly. And it seems that the conservatives in this country, they have basically pushed more for exclusion as opposed to inclusion. And they, like their evangelical soulmates, seem to have a great fear of the 21st century and of modern times in general. And I don't think that religion should be about that, especially in a country such as the United States. Remember, and I'm going to say something here which will probably upset some folks, but when does that ever bother me, right? But remember, the United States of America was formed as a repudiation, to a large extent, of organized religion. And if you have any problem with that, I suggest that one night you sit down, pour yourself a glass of good scotch, and read what the founding fathers had to say about organized religion. I saw Jefferson's Bible. It's right down there in the Library of Congress, where he basically tore everything out of the Bible except for what? The Sermon on the Mount. So that tells you right there what he felt about religion. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, Jefferson had his own problems. You know, this is a guy that loved a woman, but basically kept her in a little private closet. A nice closet, but it was a closet nonetheless. Why? Because she was part black. But I think that Jefferson, he's an excellent case of America and her hypocrisy that we have. And see, there's nothing wrong with saying it. There's nothing wrong with admitting it. Where it becomes wrong is when you try to deny it and hide from it, because that solves nothing. And it's just like, leaving a wound untreated. And that's what's happened for far too long in this country. Yes, the United States, we are a great country. We have done some outstanding, God blessed, awesome, super duper whooper, fabulous things in history. Yes, America has done that. But by the same token, we have done things here in America to each other, to our fellow human beings, that sometimes makes me want to throw up, quite frankly. And we have to acknowledge that. And you know what that makes us? You know what that makes America? It makes us human. Not saints, not the world's greatest demons. Just human. And if we could just grasp that fact, I think it will go a long way towards helping us relate to each other as fellow citizens and as fellow human beings. And it will do a great deal to help us deal with our neighbors. And who are our neighbors? The rest of the world. And that's nothing to be afraid of. Why with all this fear? That has to stop. And see, what happens, you have groups of people for their own benefit, or what they think is their own benefit. They take that fear and they use that to psych folks up. Psych them up so much that the things that we really need to take care of, we can't do. And as a nation, we fall further and further behind. Look at the South. And that's always an example of human nature and what happens when things go bad. The South spent so much energy after Reconstruction was ended. They spent so much energy trying to suppress people, primarily black people and Native American people. That's primarily who they worked on in the South. But they spent so much time doing that what happens? the South, it went from being the richest area of the United States, so that even now, when you want to talk about something being slow and backwards, talking about people having poor diets, low educational levels, where do you look to? You look at the South. And there's a reason for that. And that reason is that when you spend all your time worrying about trying to hold someone else down, you're holding yourself down. I think I said this was my last program, but that's one of the blessed things. I mean, I know everybody has it, oh, well, I don't like Al Gore because he's Mr. Environment, which I think is a good thing, but, you know, everybody has their own opinion. You know, but Al Gore is too much of a tree hugger. Bill Clinton, too much of a ladies' man, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you can throw that crap back and forth all you want. But one thing about both of those guys, both of those sons of Dixie, I will never forget, and they will always have my respect for. And that is that both of these guys said that the greatest harm that took place on white Southerners was Jim Crow. And they were straight up about it. You know, they weren't talking about, well, you know, yeah, black folks got slammed and blah, blah, blah. And their attitude was, at the time that they were being asked this question, and speaking on this subject, no, not yet, but their attitude was, well, we're not so much talking about how black folks were burdened with this whole Jim Crow thing. Just talking from the view of a, quote, white Southerner, a white Southern male, what destroyed us, what hurt us the most was Jim Crow. And, you know, people were like, what are you talking about, you know? Both Clinton and Gore said basically the same thing. The South spent so much time, they put so much resources into keeping their foot on the neck of black Americans that they wound up castrating themselves. Because you cannot keep people down without paying a huge, both material and psychological cost on yourself. And really, that is what has happened to this country. When you stop to think about how far America would be advanced as a nation if it wasn't for this whole racial thing. Race and sex, those are the two things that have hurt America the most, because it's a case of just wasted resources, holding down blacks, holding down women. And yeah, you even get women, white women to a large extent went along with that, because they feared that the sons that they raised, they wanted their sons, to be able to maneuver and fit into the society. And unfortunately, racism is how a white male was taught to be an American man. And see, they held themselves back as human beings, as people, as women. And they basically taught their sons to hold themselves back. It's just like, even a lot of businessmen will tell you, the South literally began to bloom when they started to tear down Jim Crow. And see, we're going through a same type of thing here in America now. That's why I say that my enemy, for the most part, the Republican Party, the American Taliban, because that's what they have become, finally. They are pros. Tell you what, how can I put this better? You grew up in Harlem, South Bronx, you know what I'm talking about, okay? Hey, even if you spend all your time downtown around Times Square or 34th Street, right? There's a game. It's a card game. It's called three-card money, right? You know, you got the guy, he's standing there. He's got his boxes, or might even have a little portable table or whatever. And he's outside, you know, maybe on the side of the Macy's, or maybe on 125th Street and 7th, right? And he's got his card table set up, and they got three cards. And it's usually like, the hit card will usually be like a queen or something like that, right? And I think on it now, it's funny as hell. But that's the card that you have to find, right? Which is the card that makes you the winner? And the guy will stand up there and he'll be running his mouth. Yeah, you gotta be looking and seeing, and you gotta keep your eyes open, blah, blah, blah. And then he usually will have a stooge, right, in the crowd. And this guy will, yeah, it's that one, it's this card right here. And my man would go, well, let's see if he's right. Damn, baby, you right. Ain't that something? It's your first time doing this, right? It's your first time playing this game, right? Yeah. Well, look at that, folks. First time he plays, this guy wins. Now, here you go, brother, 20, boom. You won that 20. And then they'll do it some more. And maybe, if they're lucky, they'll get a couple of more suckers. Only problem is that these suckers they don't win, right? But they get so hooked into the game that they keep playing. And that's three-card money, and I'm sure many of y'all out there now are familiar with the game. Well, sad but true. That's what racist, that's what, unfortunately, some people in business, right? That's what they're involved in. And they have been playing this game on working class white people for quite some time, right? You know that in the beginning, there was not a real hard and fast and definitive rule in terms of race relations here on the eastern seaboard. You know when they really started? Around the 1670s, if I'm not mistaken. You had a situation in Virginia where the folks, poor folks, and we're talking about blacks, some slave, some free, some indentured, right? Whites, in many cases Irish, because you had the thing in Britain with Cromwell and suppressing the Irish Catholics, and that was pretty nasty, pretty nasty. And you have to remember the Irish were really the first large group of white folks coming from the British Isles, okay, that started to settle in America. Irish women, boys coming out of poverty prison, that sort of thing. And these people, when they had a chance to get some land or something, it would be like way out in the boonies, okay? Usually it wasn't, right there in Williamsburg or right there in Richmond, along the coast, in other words. It was, as we say in the military, out in the boondocks, right? And these people were constantly, having to fight sometimes with some of the Native American tribes. And basically, the rich were getting richer and the poor were getting poorer. And to make a long story short, you had a revolution, basically. It's called Bacon's Rebellion. And this was one of the first examples of working class people in America bonding together for what they felt was justice. And he was a young nobleman, from what I understand, Nathaniel Bacon, and he organized the people, the masses of the people, against the upper crust, the lords and what have you. So what happened, the working class folks eventually, they more or less lost, per se, their revolution. However, certain things came out of Bacon's Rebellion which are still with us today. One of the things that was instituted was who could carry weapons. Black men were, in many circumstances, were no longer allowed to carry weapons, no longer allowed to carry muskets. They couldn't serve in the militia, per se. Even though at times of emergency, they did serve and they did fight alongside their fellow white colonialists. But generally, over a period of time, the rules that made a person slave or free began to become more and more tightened. Also, the laws towards intermarriage between a black or African and a white woman, because you had a lot of intermarriage between blacks and Irish. So you have to remember that originally, and for example in Virginia, you had blacks who were slaves, but you also had blacks who were indentured, like indentured servants. And then you had some blacks that were free. You actually had some blacks that sat in the Virginia House of Burgesses back in the 1600s 1640s. But what the powers that be decided upon was to slowly, well, not that slow, but over a period of time, make the person with the dark skin, that became a badge of slavery. See, you were not allowed to serve on the slave patrol. That was only for, quote, free white men. See, property owners. And, things like that. So that by the time you get to like the 1700s, boom, you're black, it's assumed you were a slave. We talk about law enforcement, right? Well, white Americans need to know one of the reasons why there seems to be almost like you're born into it, this thing about, black folks just don't like cops. Therefore, black folks love crime. No. It had nothing to do with that. However, what the problem is that there's this thing, historical memory, okay? And black Americans, from historical memory, know that the large part of why you have, in America, you have this thing, law enforcement. It was created primarily to keep you in chains, right? To make sure that you did not forget your place in society. Your place being that of an inferior. In other words, what they did, they said to white people, okay, you are a free man, even though you are poor, right? Even though you are an indentured servant. You're different because your indentured is going to be over and you're going to be a free white man. But that black cat over there, he's black, he's a slave, and that's the way it's going to stay. Unless he does happen to be a free black person, but then don't worry because we're going to have other things to remind him that even though he is not technically a slave, he is still an inferior in our society. And see, all that is a spinoff of what happened with Bacon's Rebellion. That's where you officially start making dark people, right, society's official whipping person. And for a long time, because the Irish had it pretty damn nasty also, right? But you only had segments, all right, like in early colonial America. You had Irish coming over because of the thing with Cromwell and the Orange Prince and all this other good stuff, okay? Then that kind of cools down for a while. Then your next Irish explosion, the potato famine, and what was that, 1846, 1847, where you had hundreds of thousands of Irish Catholics coming to the United States because people were literally starving to death in large sections of Ireland, and particularly everything outside of Northern Ireland, okay? But you have to keep in mind, aside from that, black folks and the Native Americans, they were established in the 1670s. That's where they were officially established as society's whipping boy or whatever. We want you to basically be the receptacle for our hatred, our hostility, etc. And here in America, that's when most of this crap began. And see, people need to understand that. And then, just as with the Irish, especially after the end of the Civil War, the Irish, there's a book out, How the Irish Became White. Because for a long time, if you were Irish and you were Catholic, you were considered to be a form of animal life. And it's this, you read the New York Times, 1860s, 1870s, and how white Protestant America were reacting to the huge amount of Irish immigrants that were coming over to the United States. Doesn't no one in New York City speak English anymore? Because many of the Irish who were coming over were, Catholic. They were coming from rural areas, and they spoke Gaelic, right? Just like the Haitians, a lot of them don't speak regular French. They speak like Creole. And that was the same thing with the Irish. So they were not considered, in many cases, they were not considered, excuse me, God, I hate the idea of having to take some type of allergy thing. I don't like taking a lot of medicine and pills and stuff, but I might have to. But anyway, the Irish were considered to be some type of subhuman beast. And all you have to do is just look at the old history books, look at the old newspapers, and the cartoons that were drawn of the Irish. And what was that sign in Boston at one time? Dogs and Irish need not apply. People don't write that kind of stuff and say that kind of stuff and draw those kind of pictures if they like you, okay? And until the Irish were accepted as white, especially as white men, that's how they were looked upon. And sometimes, unfortunately, it became a case of a race. And when I say race, I literally mean that, a race. Who was going to be at the bottom first, the blacks or the Irish? The worst urban riot in American history, even worse than what they did to blacks in, Tulsa, or the one that they did in Arkansas. Well, God, it was so many places. But those two just stick out in my mind because of their ferocity. But the worst urban riot took place in New York in the middle of the damn Civil War, and it's called the Draft Riots of 1863, July 14th till July, I think the Army was able to end it about July 21st, somewhere around there. So what's that, July 14th, so about the 21st, 22nd, around that time. They had to bring gunboats. The Navy had them at anchor right here on the East River. And they were firing into lower Manhattan to try and quell the rioters. Black folks were strung up from lampposts. The black children's orphanage was burned to the ground. Fortunately, some good Irish cops rescued the children, and none of the children were hurt. But yeah, that's because they felt that they were asked to fight a war to free black men from slavery, who would then come up to New York and take away their rotten jobs. And I do mean rotten, because they had some pretty rotten jobs. And see, that's what happens when you start playing these little culture games with people's heads. You bring about hate and fear. And that's what the Republican Party has been doing for the last 30 some odd years in this country. And they're just getting back what they have reaped. As a matter of fact, there's been quite a few of your major, I'm talking about big time Republicans, the kind of guys that you see on TV on the Talking Head show. And they have admitted that. You know, with this whole thing with Reagan back in 79, 80, it was all about race. Because you see, and this is the truth of it, and every so often you will find a Republican that used to be an honest person, and they will tell you, the Republican Party realized back in the 70s that they had nothing, that the crap that they were talking about was from another time and another place, and it was of no benefit to working Americans of any color from the early 70s going forwards, that their time had passed. That is why Nixon, Pat Buchanan, folks like that, they reached out to who? To white men in the South who used to be Democrats, because they dangled the whole race thing in front of them. And they said, well, the Democratic Party betrayed you, because they have become identified with ending legal segregation. So why don't you come over to our side? We're conservative. That's why anytime, in my opinion, a woman, a man of color, anyone that has a half-decent education, when you hear that word conservative, you should kind of flinch a little bit. Look up the conservative in the dictionary and look up liberal. And then you understand why I am don't tell me about conservatives. And don't tell me about the Republican Party. I grew up in the Republican Party. I grew up surrounded by, quote unquote, black and Hispanic Republicans. My old man was a big wheel with the Republican Party in Harlem. Ran for the Assembly. Came close to winning as a Republican. But you have to remember, this was in the 50s and early 60s. It was a different party then. We wouldn't have mostly all the civil rights bills that we are now fighting to make people pay attention to, all that was primarily the Republican Party. Dirksen, folks like that. Jake Javits, my second mentor in American politics. It was Republicans that did that. Believe it or not, Richard Nixon was hailed as a civil rights fighter in the 50s. Yeah. But that was a different party. That's when the Republican Party going from the mid to the early 70s, the Republicans got the idea that they could go much further talking about race. And that's what happened. Year after year, they began the work of weeding out the blacks in the Republican Party. By the way, you don't see too much of Colin Powell nowadays, do you? Yeah, there's a reason for that. Because he recognized that the party has been taken over by out-and-out racists. And see, we're not talking about people who are, who think that they are culturally superior to non-white people. We're not talking about folks like that. We're talking about hardcore Nazi types. That's who has taken over, for the most part, the Republican Party, especially on the local scene. And this is why I say that it really sickens me to see white working class Americans, decent people, decent, humane people, being taken over, being lied to, being made suckers out of. You got somebody like Donald Trump is going to lecture white working class men about patriotism? That is, it's worse than a joke. It's worse than a farce. It's enough to break a person's heart. And that's the problem that you have now here in America. And that's why all this business about taking over, of the Democrats reaching across the aisle, that's nonsense. Because basically, there's no one to reach across the aisle to do anything with, because that's not their intent. And we have to come to the recognition, yeah, you do have some very sick people in this country. Yes, you do have some very uneducated people, some very ignorant people in this country. And you have to think about anything that you want to do for this country in terms of helping your fellow citizens. You have to always bear those facts in mind. I'm going to have something to tell you folks in our next show. Some of you might like it, some of you might not. But the truth has to be told. And that's what we're about here at the Concern Forum. Once again, thank you so much for allowing us to come into your home. And please check us out. Same time, same channels, and stay woke. This is the Concern Forum. God bless. Have a good one. Bye now.